So our guest today is Steven Farkas. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Steven.
Well, I am a horror writer. I've been published starting back in 2002, I guess was my first book. So it's been about 21 years of starts and stops along the way. So I've published about 13 horror books, mostly self-published, but I just started publishing with a publisher. And let's see, I'm married. I have 3 adult children, and I run a horror book festival every October in Asbury Park.
That sounds fantastic. So tell us a little bit about your horror festival.
Oh, well, about 3 years ago, I decided that after going to a lot of the horror festivals, that they focus so much on the movies and not so much on the writers, that it would be a good idea to have a festival that was focused strictly on the horror authors.
Yeah.
So back in 2021, I started a festival. We were small then. We only had 6 authors. Jumped to 10 last year, and I had 19 authors this year, plus a couple publishers.
Yeah.
And we hold it in a basement bar, and it's a nice, creepy space that goes with the atmosphere.
And does it go well?
Huh?
Does it go well?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it went pretty good this year, definitely. So
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about your books.
Well, they're not, I would say they're mostly ghost stories, violent ghost stories, and I have a few sort of almost comical zombie books as well. Most of the books are kind of they're not splatterpunk or anything like that, but they're quite violent. They're quite bloody, and usually there's some sort of message in there. So
great. So have you got any sort of like upcoming projects that are coming out?
Yeah, actually, I just had a book come out last week. It was a called Summer Camp Zombies, and it was published by Psychotoxin Press, and we basically tried to do the release at the festival, so that was pretty cool. What I'm really excited about is I have my first holiday horror book coming out in probably mid-November.
Yeah.
And so I'd been thinking about doing a horror book that was set at the holidays for, God, it has to be 4 or 5 years. And I finally just decided, you know what? I'm going to finally sit down and put this book together. And the publisher really liked the idea. And in fact, they're probably going to do a like a early release with a ornament that you can get to put on your Christmas tree.
That sounds fantastic. That's quite original.
I'm quite excited.
Yeah. It's quite good. It's Psychotoxin, isn't it? Your publisher?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I went a while. The first publisher I had was kind of terrible. You know, it's almost like a predator publisher. And after a few years, I got the copyrights to my book back and then just published it myself like around 2010. And then I got more serious about writing horror. And I was very sort of gun shy about going back to another publisher, but things have worked out very well with Psychotoxin.
Yeah, I spoke to Christopher Pelton. He seems like a really nice guy.
Yes, he is.
So what inspired you to write in the horror genre?
when I was young, I the first like reading I really did was Edgar Allan Poe. And so his stories got me to reading, which also got me to the idea that horror was a genre for me.
Yeah.
And I was young then, maybe 8 or 9 years old. So that really got me started in reading horror books and the idea of, maybe someday I could write these stories that I'm reading. So
how do you come up with
that really...
Sorry, carry on. I do apologize.
Oh, that's fine. So I just was, started writing some stories when I was young, but I didn't really get serious about it till maybe high school. So
how do you come up with the dark and eerie stories?
How do I come up with them? I don't, it's kind of strange. My whole way of working is I sort of clean the house, mow the grass, walk the dogs, and the whole time I'm thinking about what would be a good story, and just sort of look around and wait for the idea to kind of hit me. And then I'll spend like a month just building the whole thing in my brain, and then finally sitting down and starting to write it. So, and most of my books are short, so they're like novellas more than they are novels, and short story collections, of course. So I think that's the way my brain works. I always say I'm building a long story with a brief amount of words. So
some people can write novellas and other people can write really long novels, and some people can write short stories. I think it's just down to the actual author, isn't it, really, on what you want to write and how much the idea actually follows in a book.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like maybe it's just the way either I see the world or the way my brain works, that building the stories, I don't need to put a lot of extra things in there. Like Stephen King writes 1,000 pages, but I have to admit, when I've read some of his books, I'm like, well, half of that book didn't need to be there. And in my opinion, I'm sure he would disagree, but and so I guess I just don't add a lot of the extra fluff in just to make it longer. The story goes wherever the story goes. And if it's long, great. If it's short, great, so.
Yeah, there's no point in making a story any longer than it needs to be, because then it just gets a little bit of overkill, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you don't want your reader to get bogged down and bored either. So it has to keep their attention, or why would they read the book? Why would they buy another book from you? So just putting fluff in so that you can add an extra chapter to make it look like a bigger book, it never made any sense to me. So I'd rather have a quick, short read that it really got me engaged than worrying about how long the book is. So
which horror authors have influenced you the most?
Well, obviously, Edgar Allan Poe was probably my first real, engagement into horror. And I think over the time I've enjoyed Shirley Jackson, Lovecraft. You can see a lot of that in my books, especially I just published a book this summer called House of the Specter, and my wife, who does a lot of the editing for me, because I just throw it down on the page and then she edits it, really.
Yeah.
She said it kind of reminded her of Shirley Jackson's books. So it wasn't intentional. It's just the way it came out. So clearly those three authors, but also it doesn't have to be a horror author that gets me going too. Like I always feel like the greatest character in literature for me was Mrs. Havisham, from Great Expectations.
Yeah.
I've often thought that would be a fun book to write, actually.
So, what's the most challenging aspect of writing for you?
Starting. Building it out in my head and actually sitting down and starting the work on the computer. Sometimes I start, I stop, I start, I stop, and then finally it gets going. And once I'm going along pretty well, then I'm okay. But sometimes just getting that first sentence down, I think I worry too much about that, and then it slows me down a little bit. Once I get to that next sentence, then I'm moving right along. So
you find like the actual first sentence of opening the book hard?
Yeah, sometimes I do. Definitely.
Yeah, it can be quite hard, can't it? Because that first sentence sort of like kind of grabs the reader in one aspect, especially the first chapter.
Well, yeah, that does. And I think sometimes I worry too much about it because I can always go back, and fix it. But for me, once that first sentence is done and I hit the period and I'm on to the second sentence, I just keep rolling for 2 or 3 weeks every day, for 3 or 4 hours till I'm close to getting it done. But like I said, it could take me a couple months just kind of wandering around thinking about the story and then finally sitting down and actually physically typing it. So.
Brilliant. So do you ever scare yourself with anything that you write?
I haven't yet. I mean, I don't think I've written anything that I would look at and say it terrifies me. But yeah, I don't think I've written anything that really scares me. I don't scare that easily, I guess.
That's good.
Probably because I started so young. Like, I think I watched Friday the 13th when I was 9, So if that didn't scare me then I guess I'm okay.
It is quite young to watch Friday the 13th. I don't think I've let that.
Well, I was at my grandparents' house and they didn't think about the fact that maybe we shouldn't watch this while he's sitting here.
So, has the horror genre evolved over the years, in your opinion?
How has it evolved? I think it's certainly gotten more independent, and I think some of the best writing now is amongst the independent authors and some of the bigger authors from the 80s, like Stephen King and Clive Barker and all. I think that's kind of waning a little bit, and the more interesting stuff is by independent authors.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it right now. It seems like when I want to read something more interesting, I feel like I look for an independent author more than a Stephen King. But I was never a huge Stephen King fan anyway. So.
Yeah. I think you're probably the first person that said that.
Really?
Maybe the second.
Well, everybody likes who they like. I like the older stories like Poe and Lovecraft, more than I like, say, Stephen King.
Yeah.
Peter Straub, those. I don't know. sort of the 80s authors. I'll still read them once in a while, but it's not like my go-to thing if I'm looking for something to read.
I mean, I've read a few of his books. I like Misery. I really like Misery, but I could never sit down with it. It was too big, way too big for me.
Right. Yeah, Misery is okay. It's I think it's one of his better books. I think the one book he wrote that I really like was called Cycle of the Werewolf, which was turned into a really bad movie called Silver Bullet, I think.
Yeah.
But that book I liked. I enjoyed that book. But there just isn't a lot that he's written that I get really excited about. So
have you got any?
Yeah, maybe I'm the only one.
I wouldn't worry about it. I'm sure there's thousands of people out there that think the same thing. So do you have any memorable reactions from your readers that stand out to you?
One memorable one, it's actually kind of a negative, but I had to laugh when I read it. I write, some good ghost stories, things like that, but I also like to write blocky zombie books every now and again too. And somebody came under one of them and he said, too many zombies. I'm like, what do you mean too many zombies? It was a zombie book. Too many zombies. It was a book about roller derby zombies, and he wanted more roller derby and less zombies. I was like, okay, well, whatever.
Isn't that the whole point?
I had never heard anybody say that before, like, too many zombies.
The whole point of the zombie apocalypse is the fact that zombies have taken over the world.
Well, yeah, usually. Most of my zombies are like rage zombies too, so I have to admit I'm more the fast zombies than the lumbering zombies. But I think I'd be far more afraid of a zombie sprinting 100 miles an hour right at me than one kind of just lurching about.
Yeah.
But, I know that's a big debate amongst zombie enthusiasts. So
How is that a big debate?
I don't know. Well, because some people go, well, it's not really a zombie if it's not coming back from the dead. I'm like, yeah, but it could be a zombie if they have, a rage illness, So I guess I come down the fast zombie side.
So what advice would you give to aspiring horror writers?
Well, I mean, if they're aspiring horror writers, they must like horror. So think of something that scares you, or think of something that you think would be scary. Sit down, play with it a little, see where it goes. I think until you start, you don't know where you're going to go with your stories, but just get started. Think about something that's scary or eerie. They don't all have to be bloody and violent. I think thrillers are just as good. So, just get started. Yeah. I think I would say that to any author, though, about anything. So,
and that's the trouble, isn't it? Some people have got a really good story in mind, but they just don't know, or they're too scared to get started.
Well, you have to get past that fear. So, I think when I started, I was too young to worry about being scared about what happened or where it went. And I had always had, like, my teachers in high school pushing me, saying, someday you could be a writer. These stories are great. So I was lucky in that way that I had support right from my high school English teachers. Yeah. So
there's a lot of people out there who don't have that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think anything that, if someone were to ask me to talk to them directly and help them, I would do it, because I know how difficult it can be to just start that first book or a short story, or, just to get the career going.
Yeah. Well, I wish you the best of luck with your new releases. I'm going to keep an eye out for the one that's coming out with an ornament. I want to see how that looks. It sounds like it's going to be amazing.
I hope so. I had actually started that out with the thought that maybe I was going to make it short stories, but instead I took the ideas of the short stories, made them chapters, and built this town that supposedly exists with nobody wanting to pay any attention to the town because everybody's afraid of the town. So, except those who live there.
Yeah.
So it turned into a standalone story. So
brilliant. Well, it's been lovely speaking to you, Stephen. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope everything goes well for you.
Thank you for having me on. Yeah,
you're very welcome.